Donald Trump just dropped nuclear tariffs on the globe today. The world's biggest market is going to be harder to access for foreign countries. First of all, part of the aim is to bring production home to the United States. Whether or not this can be successful, I don't know, because in a fair trade system, truly free trade, if a country is able to produce goods more cheaply than you could in the United States, for example, with GM in the past having golden wages as compared to China, where you had slave wages, osmotically, that money moves to where there is a lesser concentration of it, which would be China, which would be Vietnam, which are producing things far more cheaply than we can in America. So Donald Trump, by raising tariffs, just to raise tariffs, is essentially imposing a tax on the rest of the world where products become more expensive. However, there are other reasons behind this. Second reason is you want certain industries to be at home. So for example, steel production, which has moved over to China dramatically, it is strategically imperative that we can produce steel for ourselves, that we can manufacture certain items, that we are not beholden to the Chinese Communist government to supply us those in an emergency. Same thing, for example, for antibiotics or for other medicines. Those should be produced in the United States as a strategic imperative. You don't want to be caught flat-footed. We were partially during COVID when we were importing PPP equipment that we thought that we needed based on the science, and China was hoarding it all. That's just one example, and it would get far worse in a different crisis. So we don't want to be beholden to our enemies to be producing there. So part of it is to bring the manufacturing home to us for such purposes. And then there is the fact that other countries actually do charge tariffs on U.S. imports. For example, in Canada, for dairy products, they protect their dairy industry by charging 300%, 200% on different dairy products that would come in from neighboring Wisconsin. Why? They're protecting their farmers. So it's good for them. They can deprive our farmers of sales. But when we raise rates on Canada, then there's massive backlash in Canada where these dunderheads are about to elect Mark Carney for another liberal term after seeing what Justin Trudeau did to the country. This is the ire that is being raised in the way that the opposition is using tariffs as a political tool to associate their enemy with Donald Trump and saying that you're just his lackey, whatever, we're going to fight for Canada, even though they've essentially tried to burn the Canadian flag and impose multiculturalism in the country. But that's just one example. You have India that has 100% tariff on U.S. agriculture going into the country. Do we? No. Same with cars that are being imported from Europe as opposed to when we send them. We have a 2.5% tariff on European automobiles, and they have a 10% tariff on ours. So you should be able to level the playing field to at least get the American worker in the game. And hopefully this brings manufacturing home to America and improves America's lives. And this is using the weight of the United States in an effort to better life for the average American, because we've seen a lot of that money, as I stated earlier, transferred via the process of osmosis, where a solvent goes automatically to where there's a lower concentration of it and evens it out. And that, in this case, that solvent is money. So the rest of the world has gotten better in terms of their wages, but it's at the expense of the American worker. And what Donald Trump is doing is trying to protect the American worker to some degree. Now, there's the one thing that most people aren't talking about. You know what that is? It is interest rates. The last administration loaded up with cash by selling short-term bonds. They went to the short end of the curve rather than the long end. We're talking the 10-year, the 30-year. Donald Trump wanted to issue 100-year bonds when interest rates were way down and was not allowed to. And this is where he was entirely correct, because we could have financed our debt at somebody else's expense. That's the reality of it, at a much lower interest rate. Now we're at 4.5%. We were, but check out this graphic. The 10-year just dropped to 4.05%. So a big part of this might be a giant smokescreen to drop the interest rates such that we are able to finance our massive deficit to the tunes of hundreds of billions or even trillions of dollars more cheaply than we otherwise would. This is giant if we can finance the deficit at much lower interest rates. So that is definitely something to be considered. I'm not somebody that's advocating for tariffs. The only thing I will say is that I want free trade. I want, if Canada is taxing us 200% on dairy products and our dairy farmers can't compete with local Canadians, then why should we say, hey, you have access to our markets, but we don't have access to yours. Let's raise the tariffs and maybe they will both drop. Let's have reciprocal tariffs. I am perfectly okay with that. I do believe that tariffs are going to raise prices. It is a tax. It has to come out of somebody's pocket. Now, the thinking here is that it's going to come out of the corporation's pocket, that they're not going to do everything that they can, that they're going to have lower profit margins. The challenge, though, is that in the United States, there are a lot of export companies that are not going to be able to export their product, and they're already operating on low margins, so they might go under. So there is tariffs in a nutshell, but I want to stress the fact that the big thing might be the dropping of the interest rates. And once we are able to finance the deficit that has been left to us by all the previous administrations and incredibly exacerbated by the crooks in Joe Biden's admin, then the tariffs might be dropped. That is my prediction, because you have to look at what they're getting you to focus on versus what they're really trying to do. It's the magician that's getting you to focus over here versus the true goal. So just keep that in mind. And if you have any thoughts, any comments, did I get something wrong, please leave it below and thumb up the video and have yourself a fantastic day.